educates and advocates for gender equality, #empowering women. Using a chat to post our questions as well as to interact with the presenters. The session is being recorded. Right, so we will try to define gender equality, which is our key topic, the topical subject today. And then we will look at gender stereotypes, and then we will try to together unpack this question: do gender roles perpetuate violence? And we look at the effects of gender inequality. And we close by by encouraging all of us to continue with the mission of advocating for gender equality. Right, I'd like us to start with these two quotations by Malala, who is a young activist. I'm going to read as is. Malala, on her story, she says, "I often say that I tell my story not because it is unique, but because it is the story of many girls. I think realizing that you are not alone, that you are standing with millions of your sisters around the world is vital." I really like this quotation because it actually speaks directly to what we will be advocating about today, about speaking out, about having a voice, about advocating for what is right, and without being shy. So it's about telling a story of many girls who may be shy. So if you do tell this story, you should know that it's not just your story. There are other girls who have similar stories. And then we have the second quote, again by Malala, on using your voice. "We need to encourage girls that their voice matters." I think there are hundreds and thousands of Malalas out there, meaning there are hundreds and thousands of girls who can be activists themselves, or whose human rights were violated or are violated. Now, this one, I'd like to encourage all of us in the session to engage and to say that your voice matters today. Please don't think that maybe you don't have anything to say, or what you think doesn't matter, or it's of no value. Your voice matters, right? Okay, so let's begin. What is gender equality? Irregardless of your sex, it's a state of equal ease, of access. I like this this one, where it's now unpacking it in terms of access to resources and opportunities regardless of your gender, which includes economic participation and decision making, and the state of valuing different behaviors, aspirations, and needs, equality regardless of gender, of which these things which are mentioned here are the ones, I like to think they are the ones which actually are the cause of inequality. Now, I once, in fact, recently, I went to an education center to talk about this project. And I mentioned that the project is inviting all girls, and it was a guy, and he asked me, "Why girls? Why not men? Don't you think you are widening the gap here if you are empowering only girls?" And then it was a long debate where he was also mentioning the roles, which we'll come to shortly, and also mentioning different tasks and activities that are performed by men versus women. Again, gender equality is not to say we are the same. Men are similar to women, or women are also similar to men. Yes, we are different, but we are speaking about equality in terms of resources, in terms of opportunities, in terms of empowerment, as well as values and morals. Right, and then let's look at the description of gender, which refers to the characteristics. Now, when it comes to gender, it's now, referred to characteristics of women, men, girls, boys that are socially constructed, which now includes the norms, the behaviors, and roles associated with being a woman, man, girl, or a boy, as well as the relationships we have with each other, which is totally different from gender equality. Right. Let's now move on to actually say the topic that we are looking at today is not just a national, it's not a South African issue or an African issue. It's actually a global issue. When you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, which we abbreviate them as SDGs. If it's your first time hearing about the SDGs are a collection of like 17 global goals. Others, they call them Millennium Goals, which are aimed to be achieved by 2030. Now, our focus is on goal number 5. Now, what is the purpose of SDG? I'm not trying to change the focus to the SDG, but for the educational purposes, someone who hear about the SDGs for the first time, I'm mentioning this because it's very important to understand these 17 goals. They also assist us as individuals or as communities to also see what we can contribute in achieving these goals. So they are basically a blueprint to achieve better and more sustainable future for all. So that's that's a mission statement of the SDGs. Now let's try and zoom SDG number 5, which speaks to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. Right, we're looking at this was a time before COVID-19, which the goal here was that we achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. So despite improvements, there's still full gender inequality, which remains unreached. Remember the 2015, the SDG goals were initiated in 2015. Now, so we are like how many years after 2015? It's 5 years, full 5 years after 2015. Where are we in reaching the goal? And how many years are remaining for us to reach 2030? Where are we? We are nowhere actually in terms of reaching this goal. And then we look at on the right hand side that women must be represented fairly, and by saying women must be represented fairly, we're looking at the leadership roles, that is in national parliaments as well as in local governments. I must say that one can disagree with me, but in my opinion, when it comes to South Africa, we are improving in terms of closing the gap when it comes to when it comes to leadership roles, especially when we look at the national parliaments as well as in our local governments. Now, it's quite interesting that in that meeting in 2015, there was a presentation on what South Africa commits to when it comes to this topic, gender equality, and the focus of South Africa was on equal representation of women in the workplace, as well as women empowerment and ending violence against women. That is why today, even though this is a vast topic, but we will try to zoom these we will try to zoom what South Africa committed on, which is equal representation, women empowerment, as well as violence against women. Right. Let's look now at recent stats globally, which are COVID-19 implications. Stats says that there's been an increase of 30% in some countries when it comes to domestic violence. We've had such reports as well here in South Africa that the full, especially during the time of a full lockdown where everyone was indoors, and we actually experienced, or we witnessed domestic violence. In fact, to share a story, there is one lady whom I know through the work that I'm doing at Schoolnet, whom at the time I was trying to reach out to her about a certain project that we were doing at Schoolnet, and then she began to tell her story that she won't be able to attend, or she won't be able to participate because of ABC. Then she sent me a photo of herself with a blue eye and one of the eye, blocked. I couldn't believe it, because I was witnessing it for the first time in for someone who is close.
I'm thinking that it's important to know that where there's an imbalance in terms of voting, for instance, in parliament, and the male voice is dominant, it means how the country as a whole runs will consider elements that are more beneficial to males than to women. And as a result, it is important that we eventually hit the equal representation, though we have the different political parties. But from a female perspective, some elements we need to have a balance from the different political parties, where we stand together as women and say, this is how this and this and this should work. Because some of the issues are issues that relate to us as women, and we as the women are the best people to tell our story in the view that we carry as women.
I must say, Matapelo, not only in parliament, but also in the workplace. I think women should also be in the management roles, because they represent women as well. They represent women's voice, of which, if it's only men, they would overlook, as you have mentioned, they would overlook, some, or maybe not even some, they would overlook what I may call basic needs of women in different aspects of that particular business or organization.
And I guess we have quite a close experience at hand. I mean, our organization is mostly female, and I think we relate to each other and understand each other better, which makes it much easier for us to work in an environment where you know that you are understood as a woman and that your needs as a woman are taken, someone is taken heed of, and it's not just about get work done, but we know that women are responsible for taking care of children, they've got families, and all those elements. When you are in an organization where the voice of a woman is heard, then there's better understanding in terms of how women generally in the world function.
Now, looking at this slide where we are now, I'm looking at these stats on the right-hand side, which looks at women on the forefront of fighting the coronavirus. While they are in the forefront of fighting coronavirus, but again, they bear additional household burdens during the pandemic. And they spend about 3 times as many hours in unpaid domestic and care work as men. Can you believe that? So you now think, okay, how are these souls coping? Not because I'm a woman or I'm a woman, but I'm trying to make sense of it, Yeah. Anyway, let's proceed. Right, so we now going to zoom into South Africa. We were looking at the global stats when it comes to when it comes to gender equality. Now we are now zooming into our own. I'm not going to unpack each and every point here. It's just to create awareness of how things are in the past 3-4 years or so. And it's good to note that, not that it's a good thing, but it's important to note that South Africa is the country with the 4th highest prevalence of female interpersonal violence death rate, which means we should really advocate for gender equality if things are like this in South Africa. 4th highest.
Yeah, what's said about that very first statement, Hlengi, is the fact that these are it's interpersonal violence. So this is not someone who's walking out there on the street and we don't know them. This is people who are close and dear to the woman or to us, and we being violated by the closest people and being killed by the closest people to us. So these are people that we let into our personal spaces, and we trust that they'll take care of our hearts. We trust that they'll take care of us. But at the end of the day, we find ourselves in a predicament.
True. In fact, mentioning that, I mean, most of what perpetuates gender-based violence, it is through interpersonal violence or interpersonal relations, most of them.
Yeah.
Right, and then we look at crimes against women increasing to 2.4%. That was like 2 years ago. Obviously, this stat has increased considering what we've just shared about COVID stats, right? And then we look at now we zoom further to gender-based violence, where this is an interesting one, Matapelo, where it says it is assumed, it is an assumption. I mean, everyone would like to make this assumption that gender inequality is only perpetuated by men. But in this recent report, Crime Against Women in South Africa indicates otherwise. Look at these stats. 3.3% of men, which is not far when you look at the women's stat, 2.3%. That it is acceptable for a man to hit a woman. In fact, I was telling Matapelo about this, that, there are women who believe that they, in a relationship, if a man doesn't hit you, it means that man doesn't love you. What do you say about that? Let's hear from our audience, Matapelo. What is your take on this? Is there anyone?
Hello once again. Yes, I agree. It is very sad
Mm,
uh, to hear this. But what I've also noticed is that sometimes this gender-based violence is by women against other women. Okay, you should not just look at it between men and women or women and men. We
Mm,
have situations where we have women versus women, which
mm.
makes it even more sad, I think. I just want
mm,
to put that input, make
mm.
that input. Yes.
It's so true. And I think as we move forward with our slides, we'll have a bit of a talk about that. That, you know, it's like you just mentioned, it's not always just men who are abusing us women. There's always abuse, woman
Okay.
to woman type of abuse. But I
Okay.
think when we were having a conversation earlier with Shengi, what I was sharing is that what drives this number to sit at 2.3 for women who believe that it's acceptable for a man to hit a woman stems mainly from our history in South Africa, where the woman was almost seen as the child in a family and not given an opportunity to be an adult. And this was mainly because men were the seekers. So they went out looking for work in the mines and all sorts of places, and they came back with money, bread, whatever it is, and they put it on the table. And for the fact that they went out and looked for something to eat in order for them to take good care of their families, it then was assumed that the woman was part of the children group and not necessarily a partner, even though she took care of the household. And this has over time resulted in women believing that, you know, it's okay for a partner to hit you because, you know, they are the main men, and they are the overseer of the family.
mm. Yeah, this comes long way back. Yeah. All right. So, let's proceed. We have an activity here where we, in fact, the sharing that Umatapelo has just mentioned, it now speaks to gender roles. Which words do you think describe femininity, and which ones do you think describe masculinity? There you go. Wonderful. I see there is some activity that's happening. And then we have under femininity, gentleness, empathy, helpful, supportiveness. Which month is this? It's June. Come, August. You would hear about these words, isn't it?
A
And
lot of
then,
them, actually.
yes. And masculinity, we're looking at strong, stubborn. Keep them coming. Or perhaps I just wanted to check if there is some kind of activity. Let me go back to our presentation so that you do have a reference of the other words that you are working with. Now, I tell you what, this is how most, or yeah, this is how most of the people would categorize each word. The pink represent femininity and the blue represent masculinity. Do you agree with what you see here? Do you agree?
Yes, I absolutely agree because it is the manner in which we're socialized. Even our parents, they would buy pink stuff for their baby girls and
Mm,
blue stuff for, it's the way we've been socialized.
Now, here's
Hmm.
the question. What if, what if
Mm.
I'm a woman and
Yes.
I'm aggressive?
Yeah, you are described as, in fact, if you are assertive, not necessarily even aggressive, the minute a woman becomes assertive, she's automatically labeled as being aggressive.
Hmm.
Mm.
true.
And it's also possible for women to be aggressive.
It is.
Yeah, because of their nature, because of their environment, because of all sorts of elements that may influence how they come across or they present themselves.
In fact, nowadays we are seeing a lot of these roles reversed.
It's very true.
Exactly. And there are men out there who are nurturing by nature. And if you see a nurturing man, that man would be labeled as something else.
That's true.
Right. So now let's now look at a bit of theory. We'll try not to spend much time on this theory. Just not to dwell on the theory. So we're looking at gender schema theory. Now, gender schema theory, basically, or in summary, it's a theory which was introduced by the psychologist Sandra Bem, which was in 1981. So this schema theory, basically, it's about children developing ideas and theories about what it means to be masculine or feminine. And these gender schemas, what they do is that they categorize information and then they make decision based on their observations, and then they would regulate their behaviors based on those observations. I'm going to make a practical example which would actually describe or make it clear what we mean by schema. Now, so when we talk about gender schemas, we're looking at the building blocks of knowledge we have about each gender. For example, in terms of a male or of a female, we know that a male has a bird. Okay, I'll just put it as is, because some of when we're looking at the physical, and mostly these gender schemas can be made up of stereotype behaviors about men and women. Let me just, I wanted to make this example in terms of schemas that if you say a braai, we're going to have a braai, immediately what comes into your mind? Anyone? If I say we're going to have a braai, what would be the expectation?
Lots of
Meat.
We'll have meat.
It's meat. It's others would say it's pap.
It's drinks. It's
drinks. It's snacks. One would say nowadays it's swimming pool. Quite a number of things depending on your experiences as well as what you have seen, isn't it? So it's exactly that. So as little children, we try to categorize. When we think of a man, we would think of a man and then relate a man into a certain behaviors. And for example, a man would do the gardening. A man would do what? Come on, help me here. A man would drive the car, and then the woman would sit at home and wash the dishes. Yes, do the washing, while the man is doing a haircut. Those are the schemas we have about different genders. And these schemas, they destroy us actually, because they become stereotypes For example, in terms of the roles, we would, when we see a man who is carrying a baby on the back, we would laugh at that man because there is a stereotype that a man, it's a role of a woman to do that. Right, so that's gender schema theory we are looking at. Is there anything that you'd like to add on this one, Matabelo?
I think you've just summed it up nicely, Wena Sisi, that the assumption is that because you are female, there's certain things that you need to be doing, and then you are just boxed into that space, and the minute you move from that, you are seen as something else that's not even human. And I think the overarching element around having all these stereotypes and having all these schemas that we have in place is the fact that as humans, we need to have an understanding that at the end of the day, we are human before we split into any form of gender. So it's important that in whatever we do, even in grooming our children, that we inculcate this notion that says we are human, and because we are human, we treat each other with respect. We take care of each other because we are human. We do to others what we want to be done to us. And if we see the world in that light, then it almost takes away all the other schemas that we have in place. I mean, the reality is the world is changing. As more women move into the leadership roles, we are seeing less men occupying spaces in the office, and meaning that more men are actually being at home. And if they are at home, there's roles that are assumed to be women roles that they now need to start doing within the household, whilst the woman goes out and hunts. Goes hunting. And unless we have the view that we are human, the change to what is happening in society will forever be hard, meaning that the load that women carry will never be reduced in terms of women going out to work, coming back home, needing to clean and take care of the children, whilst the man sits and reads the newspaper in the house. It's the notion that we keep within in our minds that we need to start changing and thinking about differently.
Yeah, it's a challenge that it's a challenge for all of us that we are posing to get out of these boxes. We know that it's not going to be easy because we are familiar. It's like it's embedded in us, these stereotypes. It's difficult to remove them, if I may say so. But it's important unless we get out of these boxes, we will not experience, a full life as we're supposed to experience it. And unfortunately, for each individual who tries to get out of the box is labeled. At times is not labeled. The person, is not even comfortable, to move out of this box because of fear. Because you think of people around you, what are they going to say? What is happening to Hlengiwe? Because it's something that's been there, and we've seen this, we've seen it as being appropriate. So the moment I try to get out of the box, it's like I'm now acting inappropriately. So it's not an easy one, but it's something that we should make an effort, because it's like from this from what is in the slide, it's like it's limiting ourselves. It's limiting us to you know, to what you should do. It forces you to perform what is expected of you rather than live, you know, freely and authentically.
Yeah,
You
I
are.
also think that it's being labeled is the least of what can happen to you when you decide to live otherwise and live freely. And one wonders in which direction we're heading as a world, if we're going to carry on in looking us at ourselves in the different stereotypes that we carry. I think the worst that happens is us hearing of all sorts of people being murdered for being assertive, for being different, for advocating for what they think is right. You know, being labeled becomes just the least. It becomes like the entry level of what you're going to experience. So moving out of the box requires one to be bold and unfearful, and understanding that the consequences might be dire, and sometimes, unfortunately, people die whilst in the struggle.
So true. Which leads us to our next slide. I'll ask you to facilitate or lead the facilitation on this one, Matabelo.
I think this slide links nicely to what we've just spoken about in elements around stereotypes and the fact that, you know, the least of what one will experience is being labeled or being ignored, whilst the extreme of it then becomes a death. I think the people that are in the picture are well known currently. The guy on the right is Untutugo Shoba, and he's the guy who killed this beautiful lady on the left hand side, Utsuhufatso Pule. Now, this guy used to work for the JSE in the IT department, and he sent a friend,
Guys.
To go and kill this woman. The story is that this guy is actually married and had an affair with this beautiful young woman who fell pregnant, and because she fell pregnant, he was pushing for her to abort the child because obviously of the dynamics that would happen in his family cocoon. And this woman, the minute this woman was assertive and tried to protect herself, the guy then tried to send someone to go kill her. And she was found hanging on a tree 8 months pregnant. And you realize in scenario one that this guy had power, right?
Yeah.
In terms of resource, and had power in over the lady that she was dating at that time and wanted to control. And one can assume that this lady decided to be assertive. As a result, she was hunted down and found herself dead. You know, this is what she wanted to do. She wanted to keep the baby. He didn't want to, but she's the carrier of the baby. But because he's got the upper hand in terms of resources, she finds herself in a situation where she's dead.
So Matsapelo, you're mentioning something about Ugai. That he had resources.
Yeah.
You then wonder that men can do whatever they can to actually build wealth so that they have power.
Yeah. And I think this also points to the history of South Africa, that in most households, the only reason that the woman was submissive is mainly because the father had resources within the family household, and resources in the form of money. And because the woman didn't necessarily couldn't go out or didn't have the resources, then she didn't have a choice. She didn't have much of a choice. Whatever the man said in the house went as it is, without much pushing. But now that the tables have changed, women are able to be assertive. We find ourselves dead. That's the reality.
And you know what, Matsapelo, the women, most of the women who are assertive are the women who are independent, are the women who are making wealth for themselves, who are not dependent to men for resources. Because ones who are still dependent to men, you know, somehow they tend to lean on men and be submissive.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly it. So in every case, you'll realize, and it's not just with this one. Perhaps let's move on to the next slide so that we realize that in each of the cases that we have, that there's an advantage over the other. There's an element of power over the other. The second slide is male abuse is on male abuse, and you'll see that the slide is blank. We can hardly see the face. And the guys, there is a person there. The guy's name is John. Now we find that in worldwide, men do not report these cases because when they do, they are seen as weak. When they do report, they are seen as sissies. They are seen as not strong enough to fight for themselves. They are seen as possibly even gay. If you want to be extreme. But John's case happened during COVID lockdown, where he says he was, before COVID, he was dating this woman, and the relationship moved nicely until some odd day when this guy promised to do something for this woman, Alex, and John forgot to do this thing for Alex. John gets home because they had now at this stage moved in together. John gets home, hasn't done what Alex had requested. Then Alex changes totally. When he explains it in the story, he says her face changed red. And then she took the remote that she had in her hand and she threw it at him. And then later came back to him and apologized. And then what she says, she apologized, and then she says she's sorry. She's under a lot of pressure at work. That's one. Number two, she's sorry. Her hormones are running wild. Now, the assumption is that because her hormones are running wild, it's okay to be abusive towards a man. And the sad reality in the world is that when men are faced with elements of abuse, it's not even considered abuse. It's seen as, I don't know what, but men are meant to understand, and men are supposed to support. And in most instances, they're not even sure what they're supporting. So there is that element of women actually abusing men.
And you know, at times you find that the woman who is an abuser, it comes back from their background, you know, observing certain things and then make a decision that, you know what, I'm not going to be treated like my mom was treated by my dad. And then they actually, you know, develop these aggressive behaviors in trying to protect themselves.
It's exactly that. Yeah, so when the guy expresses it, he says, you know, the isolation, meaning the lockdown, was so bad that it felt like a pressure cooker. because of the amount of abuse that he experienced. And he says in the story that he'd often find himself in the shower crying because he didn't know how to get out of the situation. And he couldn't even report this instance at that time. And he was just saying that, you know, men are being abused, but there is no voice for them. Perhaps let's move on to the next slide. I see that we're quickly running out of time. The guy that we have on screen, his name is Pamandla Khoza. His body was dumped near a school. So this guy is actually gay, and he was living his life in freely so, and everybody in the community knew that Pamandla, you know, is gay. However, there was a lot of abuse within the community. So he would be called names. And this is why I was saying that being called names becomes the lowest in terms of what you will get for trying to live out your life and live out of the box and you know, and try to be yourself. He was called and labeled, and a lot of people were after him because he lived freely. I mean, in the story, they do say he had a boyfriend, and him and the boyfriend were showing affection like every other couple does. But because they are gay and because they are different to what the community understood, this young man finds himself dead and being murdered by some community members for being gay. Now the worry is, with time we find that there's all sorts of people. We find that there's gay, there's lesbian people. All those people are exactly that. They are people. There's nothing that's different about them besides the fact that their sexes are different. But the main element still remains the fact that they are people. And again, here we find the community who would obviously be much more powerful in terms of strength and overpowering this young man. He couldn't have defended himself because it's not just one person who was attacking him. So there's an advantage over the people who actually killed him. And there was a weakness in him in terms of not being able to protect himself. So in all these instances, there's an element of power, of being power hungry, of seeking strength and using that element to overpower and control other people. And I think that's where inequality stems from, or rather the root.
Yeah, true. In fact, there are so many scenarios we could have brought in here. Like earlier on, Pearl, you mentioned women to women, which is not one of our scenarios, but there are so many. We won't be able to actually unpack each and every case in this 1 hour session.
Yes, I understand.
But you brought in a very good point, Pearl.
Yes, absolutely. Because one of the things that made me to cite that one, I'm sorry to highlight this one, you know, this thing where a student was killed because of, I know we're not talking about bullying. I'm saying it starts from a young age and then it goes on. But I understand we're not addressing that now. Yeah,
in fact, we also looking at teachers who are abusing their students.
Absolutely, yes. Yes.
So
yes, that's another problem.
that's another one. In fact, while we're talking about that, our executive director, Omashni, she was sharing with us that the Department of Education would be actually endorsing a new law in terms of a teacher who is sexually abusing or who have a sexual relation with the Elena, that they would be dismissed, like never work.
Yeah, I heard that in the news yesterday.
Right, so in closing, we ran out of time. This is, a vast topic and an important one, and there is so much to talk about. But due to our time, if you can give us a few minutes to wrap up. Matapelo, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
I'll give it to you to wrap things up for us for the next few slides, which are remaining.
Okay, I think what we can do is perhaps share some of the. I think it's important that we do this because I don't want to leave the session without having sharing some of the links that are important in terms of some of the tools you can use in order to report when you experience such instances as the ones that we've just spoken about. Hlengi, can I ask that you just copy and paste them in the chat box so that people have them at hand?
Oh, good one.
Yeah. And
Right.
then we can go back to some of the slides that we wanted to touch base on. But I think the one that you were showing will be the last slide so that we just wrap up because we have really already spent 2 minutes over time. But I think the gist of today's presentation is the fact that gender roles perpetuate violence. It's a fact. And unless we break all those barriers and view each other as humans, and I think we've just kept on saying it throughout the session, that it's important that first and foremost, we view each other as human beings and we treat each other as human beings, and having an understanding that we too are human beings, and we like to be treated in a particular way, which means that we need to be looking at other people and treating them in the very way in which we would like to be treated, and in turn be able to treat the different genders in the very way that you would like to be treated, which actually takes us back to the element that at the end of the day, we are human and we've got to be considerate and make sure that the people who are around us feel that they are human. And that in some instances you will find yourself in a position that you are being segregated, you are being abused because of the difference. I mean, this gender role thing is can be quite vast because there's different types of genders now that we're facing it. Whilst we struggle with male and female, there's gay, there's lesbians, and then there's binary beings now that have come into play. So with all these different people that are labeled, because these are nothing but just that labels, labels to the human factor. In order for us to be able to move as a nation, we need to be aware of elements around treating each other fairly. And where you do find yourself in a position where you are compromised, there are places where you can report such instances, and I think the team has shared some of these with us on the chat. There's applications on the right hand side, and if you are seeking inspiration around how, and if you are, in fact, if you are looking to advocate for gender equality even further, you would want to look at inspirations around the elements of gender equality. And the Global Citizen is a beautiful place to find such inspiration. The link will also be shared with you in the chat. There's mobile applications that you can download and you can share with your kids and with family where they find themselves in compromising situations and need to report. Please use these applications. All the links will be are being shared in the chat box. If you are seeking for additional resources around other elements of gender equity, equality in South Africa, there's also a framework, a link to the framework that's been shared in the chat box. And finally, if you are a young woman who are seeking empowerment, so that, we grow in being assertive, the young woman empowerment link is also being shared in the chat box. With that being said, thank you so much for joining today's session, and thank you for all the engagement that has been happening. I think, Hlengi, it's been a fantastic session. We were very doubtful about how vast this topic is and how we would try to compress it so that it makes sense. But I think we've tried to touch on as many elements as possible. Thank you.
Thanks so much.